Hi there, it's Mary Alice here, and I am glad to be on this call with you talking about the story of Kufunda. So I thought I might begin by just weaving in how I first came into contact with Kufunda. As part of the Art of Hosting network, of course, I'd heard about it. It is, I suppose, for the practitioner network, an example of practice and action. And that kind of thing is always really interesting. And it's even more fascinating to have practice and action over a dedicated amount of time, because a lot of people go in and do a piece of work, and that's one thing, but to actually be living in the field for a long time is something quite different and requires what I would call stamina hosting.
Mm,
So I came to Kufunda in 2010 with the Powers of Place gathering, and I was invited to come and actually be a harvester at that gathering.
mm,
And I put together a harvest. I believe our booklet was in the end about 60 pages long. So we had gathered really, woman there took wonderful photographs. So we had beautiful photos of people. We had people talking about their experience and what had happened during the day. We had, the flow of our time and what we were harvesting. And I remember particularly one evening, because electricity is always an interesting thing. There was an evening, there was a time when all the electricity went off, and we were sitting in the dadi together, and we were having a circle, and I was harvesting on my computer, and the computer was giving me this warning sign that pretty soon it was going to shut itself down. I was in the uh-oh moment of, like, we're halfway around the circle, what am I going to do? And so the only thing you can do in those circumstances is to blithely keep going, which is what I did. And I kept harvesting. And for some reason, I think there was enough electricity in the group that I got all the way around everybody. I harvested the entire thing before, boom, the computer shut down. That was an exciting moment. But what I recall from that moment is the way that people were with each other. So there was at the time, way back then, I think a tension between how men and women approached each other and how they were going to be in practice together and what that would mean. And so that kind of holding of how do we approach this kind of conversation within a participatory practice context, within a hosting context, within a cultural context, within the narrative that we're living in context was really, really fascinating to me. And yeah, there is something about uh, I was in Zimbabwe. I've been in Zimbabwe twice. The first time was well before I knew about art of hosting. But I recall that time was around Easter, and I recall seeing people walking to wherever they were going with a suitcase on the head, and I had that impression of this very, I think, quintessential African landed ability to be with where you are at in the moment with the destination in mind. And that means that your stride is a step to eventually get to where you're going, but being with where you are right at this moment at the same time. I don't know how to explain that better. I don't
mhm,
have a better
mhm,
word for it, but there's something really interesting about that ability that is staying with me as I'm talking to you right now.
mhm,
The other thing was the use of resource and the use of what you have in the moment, being with what you have in the moment. So I recall being in the elders hut, and we were given, like a bucket of water, like a little bucket like that. So I had learned how to shower, wash my hair, wash my clothes, water the plants with this little tiny bucket of water. And immediately after being in Kufunda, I came back to Europe, and I went to an art of hosting training in Jonna in Sweden, which is the Rudolf Steiner village. And there was a young guy on our hosting team who proudly says to me, I've just had a 45-minute shower, which almost made me fall off my chair because I just come from Kufunda with this awareness of the meaning
mm,
of resource. And
mm,
then to listen to somebody who was in a very different story about resources was a shock to the system. So I've been tracking this story, I suppose, from long distance, and really glad to dig into where it's been and where it's going.
mm, mm. Ah, nice to hear you, Mary Alice, and nice to hear the story of arriving at Kufunda and of being there. And I'm feeling resonance. I can see the image, of the walking on the. I'm imagining a dusty road and the suitcase or the jar or whatever it is, exactly, firewood, whatever it is, and the strides that are steady and measured. And so as I'm speaking, and as you're speaking, as I'm listening, what I'm getting is like the gift, like the gift of being with what you're with. On the one hand is enormous. How often I myself am running around in a flurry and either a little bit ahead or a little bit behind, thinking of what was or thinking of where we need to go, and not actually just right here, right now. And yet it's such a basic thing. So it's both quintessential, but it's also basic. So what almost is the point of sharing that? And I'm saying that because I feel like there's so much of what we're living at Kufunda that is essence, but that is also at the level of essence that it makes it very hard to speak of other than in platitudes, or that it quickly become platitudes, or I mean, that's maybe not fair, but like what would we do with this? I feel like a lot of what we're learning has to do with the relationship, exactly, also as you spoke about how people were with each other, the relationship between the individual and the community. And what is the journey of me coming more and more into who I am and what I want, and how do I do that in relationship with my community in a culture that's very communal and very, that you actually, you are subsumed by your communal roles and duties. So I have the sense of over now 21 years of living and working at Kufunda, of such a richness of experience, that I'm really struggling with how to share in a way that is beneficial to others. And I have a yearning to do that. I have a yearning to share more of who we are and what we've learned, and not in a way of like, oh, look at us, here we are, but really of the reflection, like, so what is it? What is it that we're doing? What is it that we're learning? And what are the questions and what are the challenges? Yeah.
I think we're in this very critical time in the world where we're trying to come into a balance of me and we, and we don't know how to do it. So I was in India in January. I was staying in a beach place in Petnam Beach. I was staying in a place where I didn't realize that twice a week they have this big, loud, very loud music evening, and the DJ was about 3 meters from my bed. I felt like I was sitting on the mixing table. So I escaped to the shopping street because I couldn't actually hear myself think, let alone hear anything else. So I had time to kill. And I started asking, just got very curious and started asking the people I was interacting with, if anything were possible, what would be your dream? And I found that I didn't get any answers. And I realized after a while, this was not a concept. It's not a concept to think like that if you're, as the oldest son in India, responsible for the family. That would not be your place. That would not be your training. That would not be a possibility because you weren't trained to think like that. You're in a narrative that's quite different. So my sister said to me, maybe you like to ask luxury questions. And that really hit me. It really hit me. But then I realized maybe life has given me the possibility to ask luxury questions, because if more of us are asking what's possible, less of us have to be asking what's for dinner as a survival question. So there's something for me important in a community structure that's kind of based around an inquiry of potential and essence together, the marriage of essence and potential. What does that mean? So that leads me to kind of question to you, like when you were first starting, what was that meeting of essence and potential for you? And then how have you seen it unfolding over time? Like that little point I was pointing to of men and women have something to work on, which is true everywhere. That was a little node point where there was tension and friction. And of course, I only touched in there, so I don't know how that unfolded. I'm presuming other things have. In the meantime, the other things about how do we be financially steady? What does honesty look like? How do we help people adhere to some of the legality and frame that we need to have in order to live well together and yet be free to evolve? Whatever, those kind of questions are interesting. So that balance between essence and potential is really fascinating.
If anything were possible, what would be your dream? A friend of mine was cycling from South Africa up to Zimbabwe. I feel like he continued somewhere. I can't remember. It's years ago. And one thing he noticed, he said, when he crossed the border from South Africa to Zimbabwe, and he also he'd cycle and he'd talk to people and he'd ask about their dreams. And his sense was that when he crossed the border into Zimbabwe, he felt like the dreams, he was able to get more dreams out of people in South Africa than in Zimbabwe. And as you know, we've been living through many. Go with. Got a little dog here. Nope. Many years of political turmoil and social decline. And those are very gentle words. And I think Kufunda being built on the premise that the wealth and wisdom that we need are already here. And what do we wish? I mean, it's coming out of appreciative inquiry. So it's saying, what if we build on the best of what is, what might we build? And so like our, at the heart of of who we are is this question of what is our striving? But it's a striving that comes out of recognizing, embracing, and even celebrating what is already here. And I've seen that over and over again. I mean, yeah, decades of collapse in the country, and yet people are able to galvanize around this essence. So people, so yes, it's a luxury question. And what I've learned is that people who are also needing to ask what's for dinner are able to find their way into that question, and it takes them into completely new possibilities. And it's not that we get to a place where, okay, now we don't have to keep nurturing the capacity to ask that question. Like we get young people coming through and we're realizing, shoo, they've been closed down. Future is not, it's survival. And then they spend time at Kufunda with programs, and it's like, oh my God, you're asking me who I am and what I love and what I care about and what I dream. And in the beginning, the dreams are very practical. They are about food and money, and they're not, and I almost would say they're not really real dreams. They're dreams like, if I could have a successful chicken project, then I could survive, it's like, yeah. But what's beyond that? So so somehow that part of our journey has been to learn our way into what does it take to host possibility, actually. What does it take to host possibility in a way that isn't pie in the sky and we fly away and we starve, but actually is grounded in what is here, and what is here in the Zimbabwean context includes a lot of wounding, a lot of mistrust. There's one of the cultural aspects. People belong to different totems. And so parents would say to children, you're not allowed to eat, don't have lunch with the neighbor or the other kids from the school because they might try to poison you. So it's like kids are brought up with a fundamental assumption of others are not to be trusted, which comes out of both colonialism, but also tribal, quite painful histories. And so in living this essence that is striving towards the potential, we've had to not only embrace the light, but also the shadow. I remember sitting in a circle at Kufunda, and we were having a slight dispute about something. And then one of the women, this is a team, one of the women flies across the circle and attacks the other woman physically.
Wow.
This is many years ago. Names shall not be mentioned. And I remember being like, what? But we're meant to be the place that's, we're in the light and we're seeking to build the future. And I realized, but we cannot build the future if we deny the pain and the hurt and the lack of belief in each other and in oneself. And so I would say over the years, in addition to the very more practical work of Kufunda, and even the more collaborative work that was very, very strong out of our work with art of hosting and such, a lot more, both deeper inner work as well as deeper conflict resolution work has been part of our journey. And we, still have a long way to go. Probably all of us have a long way to go, but it has meant that I feel like significant strides have been taken in terms of the relationship between men and women, in terms of the relationship between parents and children. I mean, there's so many ways that the culture, including the colonial culture, boxed men, women, parents, children, boss, employee, that I feel like we've been in a 21-year journey of unlearning. And that journey of unlearning then strengthens the power of the dreams and the sense of possibility.
I'm thinking back to the first time I was in Zim was 2006. And I remember I stayed in I think it was the Anglo-American compound, because we were doing what was called Zim Host. I don't know what ever happened to that, but I did a program called Kiwi Host in New Zealand, which was about customer service training, and they started something in Zim. And so I was staying there, and I remember talking to the people who were working in the compound, and I really was kind of clearly got the narrative line of, if your father is a waiter, then that's what you aspire to be. You can only aspire to where somebody has gone before. And they were saying to me, oh, you have so much privilege because you can travel. I will never be able to travel. So this kind of a immediate, and that was not only financially, I think the barrier was also in the mind of, I'll never be able to do that. So I think you're pointing to these narrative threads that were still there. And I was supposed to be taken somewhere by a driver, and the driver didn't show up. And I called, and the only other phone number I had was the director, and he said to me, well, his boss, so it was a tribal thing. He may not have trusted that he was being sent to do an actual job, but rather that he was being sent just to irritate him early in the morning. So he decided not to do it. So it was, very interesting. I experienced that firsthand of, can I trust that this is actually a real request because of who it's coming from? So all of those dynamics. And for me, this question here, what does it take to host possibility? might actually be the gift of this book you're talking about.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
That, for me, is a through line. That's a really important question.
Mm.
And that is true for, if I look at, urban areas in the United States with narratives that are similar. I can't go beyond this. I'm not allowed to do that. We don't trust each other. The power dynamics between whoever you thinking about, whatever dynamic, all of that, it's the same. The fundamental woundings in community that can get in the way of you actually moving in that direction if you don't learn how to deal with them in a variety of ways. And not only here, they've got to be dealt with in a number of different ways.
Mm.
And I was listening to somebody talking about, we were talking about the power of intention. Yeah, and she was saying something about the best way to help yourself is to help somebody else, to get off yourself.
Mm.
Get off yourself, And I wrote in the chat window, because I have read the story of Jean Monnet and the founding of the European Union, and I'm very interested in that story because it's a peace story. I think it's a fundamentally important story that's been forgotten.
Mm.
So what he knew intrinsically is, if you want enemies to become better friends, then you need to get them to work on something they both care about, which is why they put France and Germany together to work on the coal and steel region, which was right between the two countries. They forced them into, which is, I've heard also of, a perpetrator and a victim having to own a cow together and take care of something together in order to reach a goal, so that they get to know each other in a different way. It's like that kind of question. How can we not only live together, but how can we create together?
Exactly.
To make something different happen.
Mm.
And so as you're talking there about embracing light and shadow, I'm thinking back to Stephen sharing a bit of his story in Denmark of kind of like, I was somebody who never succeeded. Am I a failure? Do I come as somebody who never achieved? And then what happens to me? What happens when I get invited to be seen in a different light? There's something really important in that too.
I think it's different things are coming up as you're speaking. Thank you. This is so helpful. So on the one hand, this thing about get over yourself, but
Get
what
off
I
yourself.
saw was when we were working with these early days, working with these rural women that come for programs like Kufunda, and they'd be assuming, I'm a poor person, I'm coming to be helped. And then through appreciative inquiry, through storytelling, a little bit of and through exactly that, us seeing them with curiosity, and I want to say love. I mean, maybe not always, but curiosity and warmth, and faith. And maybe me being half Danish and coming from Denmark, and this being such a different context in many ways, but my Zimbabwean grandmother for me was such a model, salt of the earth, powerful, potent, strong, financially dirt poor, but what I saw was a really powerful, incredible woman. And so I feel like I met many of the rural women that we worked with in that way. It was like, it wasn't a who are you not, but rather like, who are you? And I still remember the one woman, Anna Marunda, who somehow also became a little bit of a symbol for me of all of this work and the possibilities. She's now a fully trained Waldorf kindergarten teacher doing amazing work in the eastern part of Zimbabwe, spreading this education and teaching children and also other women. But she said after, I think, first or second program, she said, I used to think I was a poor woman for a variety of reasons, and by virtue of how you met me and what I felt were your assumptions about me, that I was someone, I had to and then I had to be like, well, then who am I? And then also the questions that came out of our process is and how do you wish to serve? And this is from Meg Wheatley's work with Bakana. A leader is anyone who's willing to serve. And so this was a very important question in the early days of Kufunda. How do you wish to serve? Where do you wish to serve? What do you care about? What you were speaking as well. And so someone who thought they were poor, by realizing, but I have so much I can give. And her work became around the 8 orphans. So when you every day are serving and making a difference, then that, then something shifts, and that begins to build worth. So that for me is one thing, is the power of the witness and the host, actually. And I guess each one of us, in how do we meet the other, and how do we meet the other? And the other thing I want to bring in, which also relates to what you were speaking, is 2 things. Is that we've seen that our work, a lot of people say, but Kufunda is in Zimbabwe, there's so much political polarity, don't you get into trouble? Is it not dangerous? And somehow our work seems to be very able to overcome polarity. So we've had MDC, ZANU-PF in the same community, and after working for a while with us, they then begin to work with each other. And I think that has also this thing of really, what do you care about? And actually, there is a lot of theft and a lot of terrible things going on in Zimbabwe, but there's also a very large Zimbabwean heart. And at heart, a lot of what people are longing for their communities is the same thing, whichever side of the political divide they stand. And so these processes out of hosting, flow game, go deep game, like all these processes that bring people together to meet, to dialogue. I would almost say to remember, to play. We've done a lot with play, and then to make a shared commitment to work on something for their community. And then they've been able to get over themselves. And that for me is actually, I hadn't realized it quite, but that gives me so much hope. Gives me so much hope. And so here now, as we are turning 21, I'm like, we need to be enabling more people to be working with these processes and to be doing it, across communities. Because, I think the willingness is there, but we're not finding each other. People aren't, and it's like in this, but actually we've seen that it's not that hard to make this shift where people then begin to find each other, and then work together.
Yeah, so there's something about transcending the boundaries in the light of potential.
You are very good at harvesting.
Yeah, that is the other thing that's striking me is an interesting seed there, because I've worked with the Energy Academy on some, so for 6 months. So I would listen to Hassan and Milena talking, and Hassan's storytelling. He's a very good storyteller about the story of the Energy Academy. And he talked about, I don't know how he does now, but he talked about Milena as the fly-in Copenhagener. Right? So there's a little bit of weird, you need a little, so in essence, you were the little bit of weird. There's the PWI, Perceived Weirdness Index, which is a real thing somebody studied. His name is Jono Hanuman, something like that. Anyway, the Perceived Weirdness Index says that you have to be slightly weirder than the system that you're trying to change, because if you were the same, you'd never be able to change anything, right?
Right.
But you have to be slightly weirder, but not so weird that the system ejects you. Yeah. But it sounds to me like you were that, right? Because you were same but different, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like you had as you were just saying before, I had that, maybe it's a Danish thing about why can't I look at you in a different way? You could be in and out of the paradigm at the same time. And there's something fundamentally important about having that kind of energetic in the mix, because if it's not, you can't get any further.
I fully agree. I hadn't really, yes, absolutely. I remember a friend of mine back when I was starting Kufunda, Black Zimbabwean woman, amazing woman. And she was also trying to start something and struggled. really struggled. And it was also that, because the story is about, again, this thing about the gender and what's a Black woman and what's a Black woman meant to be allowed to do and able to do. And whereas I was kind of, I didn't fit in the box. So it was actually a lot easier to just bring what I was bringing. Well, that's very interesting.
Now you kind of get, well, that's just Marianne.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like that gives you some latitude.
Yeah.
Actually, gives you
Yeah.
latitude, and it gives you an ability to see a different potential than the field you might be working in.
Mm.
So this important bit about how somebody is met.
Mm.
You know, those old psychological studies they did, dividing, which are not allowed anymore, but dividing classes into a class where all of the kids are told they're brilliant and they're above average, and they're they're in this class because they're remarkable, or these other classes just told they're average. What happens is they begin to live up to that expectation.
Mm. Mm.
So this, the appreciative inquiry focus of like the sunflowers turn towards the light. I think it's the same thing of people live up to the expectations of them and their own expectations of themselves.
Mm.
So there's almost a double bind when you have a cultural expectation, you can only be this, and you have a personal expectation, you can only be that too. Then the ceiling is firmly in place.
And I feel like that is such a big part of the healing that Kufunda is living through still. I was giving the example of Anna, who was a community organizer that we worked with, but at Kufunda itself, some of our facilitators, and you were giving Stephen as an example, who never completed high school, and suddenly Kufunda is running processes that are including professors and business people, and I've seen that who am I to be here? Can I? And then the ground is a little bit shook, and so sometimes it's been fine, and sometimes there's been real sense that, wow, there's a lot of inner overcoming that still needed to happen here. And I guess it is overcoming a story that we've bought into, and then how do we and rather than I've got to like push that story away, what's the new story that I live my way into? And one of the things that I feel that we're experiencing is something like, it's something like something is happening at Kufunda through us. So it's both about me and it's bigger than me. It's about Stephen and it's bigger than Stephen. It's about Skitiwe and it's bigger than Skitiwe. And there's actually there's an easing of anxiety that comes when I open to that bigger, we recognize that we're weaving. We're weaving a reclamation, a remembering, but it's bigger than us. And so it both doesn't matter that you're from a rural area and didn't finish your high school, and it's actually that very point that makes you able to be the person that can bring this through, so it's but it's I have to say, it's still something that we're working with. There's still a part of us, I think, that is a little bit caught in the views of what the world has decided is success, which is a certain level of education, a certain level of income, a certain level of a certain skin color. So I feel like that's our journey, is how can we host possibility, and a part of that is really that inner learning to rest into myself, and to do that together. So the I and the we, the me and the we.
So that would be an interesting thing to really keep as an ongoing inquiry, what is asking for embodiment.
Mm. Okay, say a bit more when you say embodiment.
Well, I'm thinking of, okay, if there was a spirit of Kufunda, it's
Ah.
actually it's asking to be embodied through you and what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's so this bit of, it's bigger than me. It's both me and bigger than me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what is that future possibility or potentiality that's being asked, that's asking us to embody it into reality? You know, it's almost like we are here in service of something bigger than us, and we're going to benefit as we attend to that, each of us, but and as a collective, and it's even bigger than the collective. So there's something really interesting about that. That, and then the other thing I wanted to raise was this kind of go, let's drop success and let's turn to well-being. What does well-being look like?
Thank you.
Because hell with that. I remember I ask people a lot of times, what was your biggest birthday? Like everybody has a birthday where they had the oh shit moment.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was, I was never 49. I was just almost 50 for a whole year. That was really funny. And I realized that for some reason in my psyche, 50 was this marker of had I achieved success or not.
Uh-huh.
And I wrote myself a little thing called No Markers in the Visible World, because by the time I turned 50, I didn't have any of the markers of success. I didn't have a husband. I didn't have a family. I didn't have children. I didn't have a house. I didn't have a career, you know, in a big whatever. I didn't have a lot of money. I had a car. And when I turned 50, I was actually house sitting for somebody. I didn't even, so I wasn't, I suppose on the measure of success, it was good. I didn't pay rent for 3 years. That was pretty successful. But I realized that part of me was the part that was conditioned to look at this measure of success, felt kind of disappointed and sad. And the other part of me didn't give a. The other part of me is going, nah. Or because as somebody said to me once in my life, if you'd been meant to have the normal life, you would have had it by now.
Exactly.
It's like, this is not what I was meant to do. Okay. I have to deal with the consequences of that. Look at how I balance it. But what does well-being look like? Because I think that's what the world is actually longing for, and we're not paying attention to in this striving for success. So I was listening to some research recently that was talking about all the research they've done, which indicates that people who live in collective and are attached to other people are healthier, live longer, or less. You know, there's a massive wave of loneliness in most of the world. Yeah. Okay, so what does it mean when we know how to be community together? And we know how to create that, or we know how to evoke that in anybody else?
Yeah.
What are some of the, you know, like if I'm looking at the book like that, that may be one of the titles, you know, what does success really mean? That might be one of the chapters. So you know, as we're talking, I can see a number of node points that would be really interesting to keep pondering on, and say, what is our reflection on this that we want to give to the world, because it's helpful for other people to think about what does it take to host possibility.
Wow, thank you. And you know, we've been, especially with COVID, we realized, I mean, we had the most extraordinary time during COVID because we're still out in nature, and suddenly we can't go out and do a lot of the community work we'd been doing in the country. We did a whole bunch of trying to get connecting with people via WhatsApp, but we also had a lot more time. We did more community work. We did nature observation. We did study together. Because we were afraid. Many people were afraid during COVID. We were very afraid in the beginning, and they were like, "What can we do to counter our fear?" Okay, let's study about what's going on. But also, we dived into spiritual texts, Goethean observation. I mean, we got to know some of our weeds really well, and some of our medicinal plants really well. It was, and so, and then we noticed what was going on in the rest of the country, and so it was like, actually, we've been learning a lot about well-being, not only through COVID, but actually that is a big part of what. That's a big part of what it takes to host possibility. actually, right? It's returning to well-being, even in the midst of challenge and struggle and strife. And I wanted to also just say, I could say a lot more there, but I'm seeing time, and I wanted to also just say something about, I love this question, what is asking for embodiment? And one of the things that's coming through, Kufunda came to another level of life when we started the primary school. We have a Waldorf-inspired primary school at the heart of the village. Like, I don't know how many kids it is now, 80, 90 children coming in every day, you know, and it's beautiful. And children are being invited to be there fully, head, heart, and hands. And what we're seeing and the next generation, so, you know, my kids are 14, other kids of the village are much older. And like the next generation is knocking. And I have a sense that there's something about, you know, I was saying to the team the other day, I was like, we're going to give them space. They're going to come in and we're not going to know what happened. It's just going to be like, woof. I really have a sense that there's something around beyond university, beyond education, self-learning, self-organizing. You know, a lot of what we've been learning as community organizers now for the next generation of young people finding their way in a country that's actually collapsed, with an education system that doesn't work, and to say, but we can still, we can still find our way. And so I was recently at one of an ecoversity gathering, and they're all about unlearning and self-directed learning and creating learning spaces and learning hubs and everything that's deeply aligned with Kufunda. We've been part of ecoversity since the inception, but somehow a little bit far away for a while. And I'm like, I think there's something there now for us, is opening Kufunda in a much bigger way to the next generation. Almost like that energy is asking for embodiment.
Yeah. There's some, I was part of, do you know Bio Akamalope?
Yes.
His work, yeah. Wow, what a brain that guy is. Anyway, I went to the Emergence Network meeting that was on the 21st, and there is a word for this. It's called hoitagogy, which is derived from the Greek word heuriskine, and it's about self-study and the importance of self-directed learning. So there's something really, and that this is a new word. It's not been around for that long, intriguingly enough.
I'll look it up.
And well, let me put the link in the chat window because I actually have it.
Thank you.
I can do this. So that's actually interesting, pioneering that. Okay, there you go.
And we're a learning village, you know, that is what we are. I sometimes feel that which you say you are, life comes and challenges you, and are you really, you know, are you really?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, we fell asleep. Oh, okay. Now oh my God. All right, great. Thank you.
The other thing I was going to ask along that line of, have you ever read the book Ishmael?
Yes.
Daniel Quinn. So there's that one of the series, there's like 3, is My Ishmael. That's all about education.
I must actually go back and look. I read them all. I loved them.
But My Ishmael, that one is really, what I got from that was so interesting how we've said, I think education and learning got a divorce at some point in time, and the children are suffering. That's what I think happened, because you cannot stop. This is set up to want to learn. Exactly. That's such a driver when, and you know, kids want to go to school so bad, and they don't want to go to school so bad when they experience what's there. But you know, if you set up a circus tent and all this stuff was there to learn, you put a barbed wire fence around it, they would find their way over it and around it and through it in order to get to what they want. You cannot. So it's, you know, people flunking out of school is not the problem of the child, it's the school system. If that were a business and they were losing customers like that, they would change things. Right? That's kind of. So the other thing I want to point to that I think is a very prevailing thread in the storyline is the curiosity all of you continue to show. Like, having a good time during COVID. I was just reflecting as you were speaking that, oh shit, I wish I was with you guys, because I had a terrible time by myself for almost 2 years.
Wow.
You know, that
Yeah, I
was
can't imagine, Marielle. I actually can't imagine.
I didn't know anything about co-regulation before that, but I really learned something about that. And I find most people don't know what that means, the word co-regulation. So we human beings are set up to want to do that, but to say, okay, what do we do to counter the fear? Let's go learn something is actually really interesting as a stance. Let's be curious about something. Let's anybody suggest something they're curious about and go for it. That is actually really, really interesting, because fear and curiosity can't exist in the same space.
Thank you for that. I feel like that's been a learning, yeah. In fact, a Danish friend from Pioneers of Change, Milla, I was so inspired. She was always like, when there's something she didn't understand or didn't like, rather than move away from it, she moved towards it. And I feel like in many ways I hadn't realized that we are living some of that too. So thank you for seeing that. Yeah. And what you're saying about co-regulation, I'm just realizing, so, and freedom, actually, a big word for us is freedom. And people would say, but freedom means that you can do whatever, and, you know, you can step on each other's toes and feet. But it's like, what's the freedom? Maybe this is too big of a theme, but there's something I feel like we're learning about freedom, which also relates to learning about self. That when I'm truly doing what comes from deep inside, and maybe even from source, actually, and I realize I'm free to make a choice for my path, then it isn't selfish. It's for me, and yet it isn't selfish. So that's one of the things I'm seeing. Why am I saying that in relation to co-regulation? Oh, freedom, because I got very excited about meditation and some of our anthroposophic study and all these things. And I was like, everyone has to do this. This is key, you know, my path. We must all do movement medicine. And so there was a period of time where I was like, we will all meet on Monday afternoon, 4 to 5, and we'll do study together. And I mean, oh God, we had this, our office space was full, or our meeting space was full of somewhat disgruntled, disengaged people. And I was like, wait a minute, but this is not what Kufunda is all about. And can I trust? Can I trust that the people who are meant to be here will be here? And now it's maybe, sometimes it's only 3 people, sometimes it's 6, 7, there's a core. And what I'm realizing is I feel like a lot of what we're doing when we're doing this more inner work together, even though there's only it's not the full village, but somehow the ripple of the quality of what's happening is touching and transforming everything. It's quite extraordinary for me. I mean, this is now, you know, a few years in, but I'm like, wow, it's given me such another faith in if we each, I don't know, just a faith in trusting that it's okay, that we don't all have to be the same, and we don't all have to go on the same path, and we don't all have to get to be enlightened. I'm not saying I'm enlightened. It's
everybody will find their way up the mountain.
Exactly. And the ones that and somehow I've said it.
I would name that because I've noticed the same thing, you know, like in Collective Story Harvest, my only rule there is there must be one person who's a witness, because I've noticed that if there is, then the listening is so much deeper with everyone else. And I've just, for me in this moment, as you were speaking that, like the 3 of us in the space doing the whatever the study is, and it ripples out, I've just named that to myself, homeopathic resonance work. There's something about this kind of resonance work as a homeopathic. So I've read in different places, it doesn't take everybody to be an enlightened master. If you have 10 enlightened masters on the planet, that's enough to shift the resonance. And so it's like because as you grow like that, incrementally more presence happens. That's just what happens. So that's interesting. And I think it was Vanna Earhart, maybe he said it, because I've heard Peter Block say it, and I know he was with Vanna Earhart for a long time. But people need to be confronted with their own freedom. So I like that, interesting, that verb, confront people with their own freedom.
Yeah.
Like even just said, hey, I just want to remind you, you have the freedom to choose right now. Are you awake to that?
Yeah. Yeah. And when you come from a school system where everyone, oh God, it's so conformist.
Face the front. Yeah, face the front, do the rote learning.
One right answer. Yeah.
The tyranny of one right answer.
And that's was actually kind of a measure for me of success. Now I use the word in a not successful as well, was the more people started disagreeing with me over the years at Kufunda. I could see people changing. This one, he's speaking up a lot more. He's disagreeing. Now. And it was like it's kind of this gradual journey of seeing the village stand. It's like
I like that. That's important. That's important.
Yeah.
Because one of the questions, I think, if this is going to be a book or whatever, is, or I'm just thinking of that, is, how do you be the founder energy in this paradigm? This is really difficult. This is really difficult for so many NGOs, which are with a founder energy that won't let go. Has come to a certain age and doesn't know how to turn it over, what will happen. That was the interesting thing at this emergence network. Bio handed the work over there in Dunford. So this was, they had a little ceremony about that. Orland Bishop facilitated. But it's an interesting thing to go, when you don't know what to do with your dream, and you don't want it to die, how do you hand it over? Yeah. This is a very interesting question. Yeah. And kind of that raises what is stewardship, what is eldership, and what does it mean in this context? And for you, that conversation that we were having in Denmark, that was about in traditional times, one of the elder roles is to teach the youngers, but to do so in such a joyful manner that they want to continue the practice. And I thought that is kind of what a call that is. How do I teach what's important in such a way, in such a joyful way, that the joy becomes embodied in the practice? And that leads me to this final thing I want to say in this little moment before I hear from you, is that one of my friends, Mike Smith, was the founder of the AIDS project that did quilts back in the day when all the gay men were dying of AIDS. They did the quilt project and brought all the quilts to the mall in Washington, D.C., which fundamentally changed the viewpoint on AIDS in the country. And I interviewed him for the Story of the Future Summit in 2018 about this project, because I thought it was so fundamentally interesting. And he said to me that as he looked back, he said the two of them were co-founders together. And he said, as I look back, the conflicts we got into, now that I'm seeing it from like the rearview mirror, the conflicts we got into were in actual fact about what was the heart of this project that was so important that it needed protecting. And where could we be diaphanous and allow people in so that they could actually add their part and do their bit and feel like they were part of it? Because we were desperate to have enough energy to move a mountain of what seemed like a narrative that would never change. And so those were the conflicts we got into, but we never actually articulated it. And if I would say to an NGO or whoever's doing something, what's the most important thing to do, it is to be aware of what is the essence that needs to be protected. And where are the areas that are diaphanous and everyone can play. And to be clear about that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that's a great question for us. I mean, we've asked ourselves a lot of Zimbabwean organizations come through Kufunda and like, you guys are so different. You're so different. And we've asked ourselves, it would be wonderful to do a harvest of, so what is it that makes us different? So we're in the question right now around what really is our essence. We haven't said that needs to be protected, but that is an interesting added. It's a bit the same like confronted with your freedom. It's like adding these words that just makes it a little bit more like you have to wake up in it. Especially as the intention now really is to invite in and give much more space to the next generation that's knocking. Yeah, and I love the teach and demonstrate and be in it with so much joy that they'll want to continue, and I think that's actually one of the challenges sometimes in all of the social work is it's so serious.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things I love about Kufunda is we've learned that celebration and play and community is where it all begins to grow. It really is. It really, really is. That's been a big learning for me. I can be quite serious. And then maybe this whole thing about founder energy, I think what I'm a little bit struggling with, but which is great, is getting out of the way. It's we had a meeting today and the team arrives and no one has the notes from last week's meeting. No one has I mean, maybe one person had a notebook, and I'm like, what's going on? If I wasn't here, what would is like it just seemed a very sloppy way to arrive to a meeting. And they're like, actually, it's true. We fully trust your capacity. You host us beautifully. So we just arrive and then we be hosted, I'm like, no. We're co-creating.
Learned helplessness.
So we had a good chuckle about it. Initially, I was like, what? But I realized it's too easy for me, especially when I'm not here full time. So when I come in, I just plunge right back in and I orchestrate, and it's like, oh, wait a minute. You spoke about what was the word you used about elder? But it is almost like I'm an elder in training, and I actually need to step back and create space. Yeah. Because everyone here is so utterly capable. And yeah.
Years ago, I had 2 cats, and I noticed that I had the older cat for a year before I got the second one. I went to visit some friends, and I found myself coming home a year later with a little box with a kitten in it. I don't know how that happened. I'm not sure how that happened, but that happened. Anyway, and I noticed that, like, the first cat had a full personality. But when the second cat arrived, it's like there's a spectrum of personality and they occupy parts of it. Like I've noticed that in families too. I know a family of 4 sisters when they're all like powerhouses, but one of them actually is a professional storyteller. So it's like she's the storyteller, the other ones aren't, even though they're all capable of doing that. It's like somebody takes up a part of the spectrum and then you can't take it up.
Right, exactly.
And I noticed that when I went to Findhorn. I've only been to Findhorn once and found it to be kind of weird. But people complained of, oh, she's the such and such healer, so I can't do that. It's like somebody had already taken the place on the spectrum. So people tend to orient themselves like that, I notice. So I guess if you come in and you always have the notes, then people will go, yeah, we leave her space because that's what she does.
Yeah.
Quite a human tendency.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel like there's more, and I'd love to have another conversation, but this feels like such an amazing beginning and such a helpful conversation for me in terms of framing and orienting and beginning to see some of the themes that we have been living with and that we can deepen into our own exploration around to be able to share as well. Yeah.
Good.
Hmm.
I'd be happy to have another conversation. And I was really kind of musing as you were talking, oh, it'd be very fun to be in place and go, all right, what is the essence? We're on the track of it. What's it called?
Meg said to me, we spoke about this thing about the being of Kufunda. She says, find out what her name is. I have a sense it's a she. And I was like, how am I going to find out what the... And I was like, so yeah.
You mean the spirit of Kufunda?
The spirit of Kufunda. Who be she? I don't know yet.
It's kind of like Burkana. Is she looking for
exactly.
What's happened to Burkana? I've always wondered that. But I thought about that because when I was in this 10 network meeting, they said they had laid that project to rest for a year. So there's something about, and they were talking about their work is around kind of the emergence of how we be and who we're being together, and they don't know where they're going. They don't know what to do right at the moment. So there's something it's an evolutionary shift point. There's something really important about you guys just being curious and learning together. That's actually the embodiment of the future is important.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording.